So this is a 2017 BMW M3 competition with a manual transmission. This is a 2018 M3 competition with a DCT transmission, which I guess that's kind of like saying ATM machine, but whatever. In any case, I've been wanting to do this video transmission comparison for a while now, ever since we got this car about 1.5 years ago. I thought of a bunch of different ways to frame this sort of setup question and ultimately settled on, if you are a die-hard manual transmission driver, would a DCT car be a suitable alternative if you had no other choice? So that's what we're going to talk about today. Okay, I am one of those fanatical manual transmission drivers. In fact, every car that I've owned since 1996 has been a manual transmission. What? Go through the list? You got it. So, 96 Dodge Neon that my mom won from a radio station, true story. 95 Firebird Formula, 2000 Trans Am, 2005 Mazda 6, 2011 Audi A4, 2014 A4, 2018 A5, and finally, the 2017 M3. So that is 27 years of manual transmission. That's depressing. Given that though, I'm not one of those like manual transmission elitists that thinks less of you if you drive automatic, even if you have a sports car. Quite frankly, I don't care what you drive, but for me, has to be a manual transmission. I don't care if it's 6 hours of stop and go city traffic, as long as I can physically push down the pedal and am not dead. Ideally, I will be driving a manual transmission, internal combustible engine car. Now that being said, what if you don't have the option? Manufacturers just aren't making as many of them anymore. In fact, you can't even get an M3 competition with a stick shift these days. With a stick shift, which is idiotic, but that's another story. So yeah, there are less and less available with new cars, and the used car market is still kind of crazy. It's come down like a tiny bit, but it's still pretty wild out there. So if you didn't have the option for a manual transmission, and you are a die-hard manual transmission guy, would a DCT be a sufficient, suitable alternative? I think the best way to talk about it is take it out for a drive and go through some of its finer points. Okay, so let's talk about the good parts of DCT. Well, first of all, it is insanely faster than, well, I don't know about insanely, I tend to use that word a bit. But anyway, it is faster than the same car, all things being equal, if you were a one-to-one comparison in terms of power and performance, then it's equivalent in manual transmission. So the DCT transmission, I think it's like an 8 millisecond shift time, which is it's absurd. So yeah, you will get better times in a DCT car every single time against manual transmission equivalent, better 0 to 60 times, better quarter-mile times. In fact, the published 0 to 60 times for an F80 M3 are, I think it's like 3.9 to 4.1. It's because if you're in a DCT, it's 3.9, and if you're a good manual driver, it's 4.1. Of course, it's more fuel efficient. Anytime you have an automatic transmission, it's gonna be fuel efficient. Now, granted, you know, I say automatic, it is automatic in the sense that it's not manual, but DCT is kind of like a hybrid a little bit. And I'll get to that in a minute. I don't know if it really goes into comparison to talk about the mechanical values or how you wouldn't have to, you know, potentially worry about, you know, clutches wearing out and replacing them and stuff like that. I mean, it is true technically, but is it really a consideration for someone who really wants a manual transmission car but is forced to accept a DCT car? No, it's not a consideration. Paddle shifters, I've never had a car with paddle shifters before, and they are a lot of fun. It's kind of like a video game. Yeah, it has the stick has like the sport mode where you can click it over and then click up and down a gear to simulate manual. I mean, my wife's SUV has that, and that's cool, but the paddle shifters are a lot of fun. Though, I mean, I guess you get used to it like anything, but it's kind of weird because like I don't always drive 9 and 3, so, you know, driving like that to be able to constantly be able to have access to them is sort of weird if you're like spirited back road driving, for example, because I tend to kind of be all over the place a little bit, so you have to sort of find their center as the wheel is moving, but nonetheless, they're a lot of fun. Next is the drive logic button. So this is a button that is just below this shifter. I had no idea what it did when we first got this car. I had to look into it a little bit, but I believe it's called drive logic, and it sets the sort of level of aggression of your gear shifts. So it's got 3 levels. Obviously, the first level is your everyday cruising, mellow, sort of the most conservative of gear selection. You'll be in 7th gear before you even hit 50 miles an hour. Level 2 is a little bit more sporty. It's kind of when you're carving up back roads a little bit. When you're, say, cruising at like 50 miles an hour, it'll sort of keep you in a slightly lower gear so you have more available power. 3 is just full balls to the wall crazy. When you floor it, it'll drop you, depending on what speed you're at, it'll drop you 1 or more gears and you'll just launch like a rocket. It's really kind of ridiculous, and that's what could get you into some trouble if you're not careful. Speaking of launching, another thing, DCT, you have launch control. Now, I forget what the sequence is, but basically at a stop, you kind of set it up and it will automatically launch you from a dead stop, which is, it looks like a lot of fun. Now, there are some ways that a DCT does kind of mimic a manual transmission. For example, it will roll backwards if you're on a hill. So like a manual transmission, it has that 3-second brake lock where if you're pushing down the brake and you release the brake, you got 3 seconds and then it will roll backwards on a hill. So that's a little weird if you're not used to that. Another thing is it will not launch you or lurch you forward when you take your foot off the brake. So a normal automatic, you let your foot off the brake and it starts moving forward, starts rolling. Not the case in DCT. So it's kind of weird when you're trying to be very careful. As opposed to a manual transmission, you can feather a manual transmission like inches per hour. Whereas this thing, yeah, it's very jerky if you're trying to get started again. But anyway, the big question is, not that we're doing any kind of big crazy reveal here or any kind of build-up, DCT, is it a sufficient alternative if you are a diehard manual transmission driver? For me, no. It's an awesome car. Never mind that it's an F80. Let's just focus on the transmission. It's a really, really good transmission. I do love it so much better than like a traditional automatic. It does have definitely a lot of things going for it that make it, you know, more fun, a more sporty kind of sport car-like sort of drive. But it's just not the same. I kind of make the comparison of like Spotify versus vinyl, right? So if you just want to hear the music, you can. It's really convenient just to fire up Spotify and kind of, you know, be on your way with listening to music. Vinyl is kind of a pain in the ass. You know, you got to maintain a vinyl collection, got to have a special turntable, got to have a better stylus in order to get better quality music. And I'm not a vinyl snob by any means, but I think it is an apt comparison where, you know, it's just it is a little bit more of a hassle, but I just think it's worth it. So that is my overall opinion. DCT is an unbelievably well-engineered transmission, and the logic and the sort of software behind it, or, you know, whatever, definitely makes it a lot of fun, but it just cannot simulate fully the feeling of full manual transmission. But it is still a lot of fun, dude. Paddle shifters, good times. By the way, this is in Drive Logic 1, level 1, and I mean it's still pretty aggressive. So you get a sense of how wicked this is. So we'll put Drive Logic in 3. Yeah, that can get you into trouble. So I'm doing what? I don't even know how fast I'm doing. I probably shouldn't talk about that. Well, I'm actually doing under the speed limit because I'm stuck behind a car with a trailer hitch thing, whatever. But anyway, the point is that oh good, he's turning. I'm doing like 40 and I'm in 3rd gear. I think if I was in 1, I'd probably be in 7th gear. So yeah, drive level 1 is obnoxiously conservative. And then when you let your foot off the gas, it just hangs in that low gear. I'm still in 3rd gear. You can hear that downshift too when you come around a turn and you lower it a little bit. Good Lord. This thing is not playing around. Yeah, that is wildly aggressive. If you get a couple of minutes on roads like that, it definitely gets a little bit closer to the, you know, can a DCT make you feel better about not having a manual? I will give it that. All right, well, with all that being said, let's go back. Let's head back home, hop in Yaz, take her out for a quick spin and sort of talk through the finer points of good old manual transmission. I should probably fire up Waze at this point. Chesterville Road, what the is that? this just feels like home. So the manual transmission, specifically in an F80, but you know, in general, it just feels right, you know? Now, I know there's, you know, that's me, and not everybody's like that. You know, if there were more people like that, then more manufacturers would still be offering stick shifts. They're less available because people just aren't buying them. In fact, I kind of remember a time when you used to pay extra for the automatic, which is kind of funny to me. Manual transmission in this car. Okay, here's actually the one thing I would note about 6-speed in an F80 is that despite the fact, again, that I've been driving stick for 27 years, it will still humble the crap out of you. And there are plenty of days where I get in this car and I'm like, do I even really know how to drive stick? Because it's just got characteristics of it that make me feel like I don't know what I'm doing. Like two case in points, and if you've got the same kind of configuration, maybe you can sympathize. But one, like coming into my neighborhood, it's slightly uphill a little bit, a lot of stop signs. If I don't give sufficient power taking off from that stop sign, it chatters terribly. And it's weird because it doesn't always do it, but it does it enough times where you're like, again, do I know what I'm doing? And the other thing is that particularly when it's, you know, cold, meaning like you're just getting on the road, it'll, like, if you're not careful, it can buck wildly, especially when you pull out of the neighborhood and onto the main road. It can get a little wonky in that second gear transition where it'll just buck really badly. Like, you just got to be careful with the power that you're giving it, and those are times where I'm like, dude, do I even know what I'm doing in this car? So yeah, I mean, it will humble you quite fast. Quick funny story. So when I was 16, I got a job as a valet parker at like a pretty upscale restaurant and hotel. And of course, in the interview, they're like, you know, do you know how to drive stick? Yeah, of course. Because conceptually, as most 16-year-olds think they know everything, but conceptually, I was like, yeah, how hard is it? In fact, even my dad, he was an expert, you know, manual transmission driver. He was like, it was the day before I was starting. He was like, sure you know what you're doing? Like, you know how to drive stick? And I was like, yeah, you know, dude, I'm gonna be in a parking lot, but like 0 to 10, you're in first gear, 10 to 20, you're in second gear, just, you know, whatever. And he's all like, okay. Sure enough, on the first day on the job, I don't know how many cars in I am, but I get a stick shift car, get in it, I'm like, okay, no problem. Boom, stall. Start up again, stall again. I'm like, ugh. So finally, and it was just the best one. Like, the other guys I was working with were like, hey, need a manual transmission guy over here? Because I couldn't get the car going. In fact, there was, only because this is a BMW story, by this point, we were doing a wedding because we also had a ballroom there. So I kind of got the hang of driving stick. We get done this wedding, this guy's coming out, this guy and his wife, and he hands me his ticket. He's got a beautiful, brand new 5 Series, but it's an eyesight. Like, he can see it because it's not that far away. So he's standing there, and I see he's got tip money in his hand because, you know, valet parkers work for tip money. So go over to the car, get in, start it up, go to bring it to him, boom, stall the car. I'm like, fuck. So restart it, get it over to him, hand off, no tip. So, I mean, I guess I kind of understand, but nothing better than stalling a brand new 5 Series right in front of the customer. We've come a long way since then, but still, sometimes in this car, I am made to feel like I'm almost back there, not really knowing how to drive stick. That's kind of an exaggeration, but still, sometimes it's not. But anyway, still, that being said, all those things considered, just nothing like a good manual transmission. So good. All right, guys, well, I think that's about it for this one. So, you know, again, if you're not absolutely just stubborn-headed like I am and insisting on manual transmission for a car, if you're a little more flexible on your transmission choices, I really don't think you can go wrong with the DCT. It is a lot of fun. I love taking Nardo out sometimes and just going on back roads and letting the transmission do all the work. And again, the paddle shifters, it's like a video game, but it's a lot of fun. So can't go wrong, but for me, it's got to be 6-speed, manual only. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. Give it a thumbs up if you did. Subscribe if you haven't already. A lot more F80 content, as I always say, coming soon. And I will catch you in the next one. Thanks for watching.